Hi, all. Question for you. Would you consider yourself a news junkie or a news avoider? I'm a news junkie. Probably comes from my background, so you might have seen in my bio, or maybe I've talked about it before, I don't recall, but I have a bachelor's degree in journalism, and I worked as a journalist from the 1980s through the 90s. I was a crime reporter in Oregon, in Washington State, and I actually ended up at the height of my career at 23 at the Chicago News Tribune in Chicago. And it was very exciting. I learned just enormous amounts, but found myself a little bit disillusioned and frankly depressed by it because I was checking the morgue, I was seeing bodies, talking to gang members and family members who had just lost loved ones, and it just got to be exhausting after a while. So I went back to school, dove into academia, but I can't shake the necessity to listen to the news primarily on the radio. I'm a bit of a skeptic of television news. I was when I was a journalist. Those were the people that I was often elbowing, truly, literally. They were the most physically aggressive, and I would be elbowing them to get into a news story. I was trained in print journalism, so as a newspaper journalist, that line of work in a lot of ways has gone by the wayside. It's completely different now. I was trained in the 80s in media law, media ethics, things that I don't see coming into play quite so much these days. But I am the person who has radio news on, typically NPR, but sometimes other things. I do have satellite radio in my car that I pay for, so I like to flip between CNBC, CNN, BBC, various kinds of news throughout the day as I'm driving around. All this to say, it's sort of funny in my home. So I think I've said before, we have 5 kids, mostly teenagers at this point. I will go from room to room and I'm turning the radio on to NPR because there's always something happening, particularly, oh my goodness, this past week, always something happening. And I want my kids to be worldly and apprised of what's going on. And my dear husband, when he's home, follows me around and shifts the radio. Every room that I've been in, he'll shift it over to music. Sometimes classical, sometimes something from the 60s or 70s, just depends on his mood. At first, it irritated me. Now it's sort of a joke. And sometimes I leave it, sometimes I switch it back and then duck out of the room. Anyway, so I don't know if I'd classify him as a news avoider. I think he gets his news mostly online. He's reading it while he's at work and other times. And I think for him, it just gets depressing and exhausting to have it on all the time. And that's completely understandable. My whole point in all of this, number one, I want you in your own heads to answer that question. Do you avoid the news? Do you step into it, whether it's uncomfortable or not? Are you someone who says, I'm just too busy? For that one, I'm going to say, be a little bit careful. It's difficult to enter into our culture well without some sense of what's going on in the news. I've bugged all of my kids as they enter their teen years. If we're going to pay for some kind of smartphone, I'd like them to have some kind of news app on there that's going to alert them to what's going on, whether locally or nationally or internationally, frankly. So here's my challenge to you. We have been looking at leadership. Really, the first half of this course was mostly looking at leadership styles, and a lot of you were diving into your own styles of leadership, which I appreciate, or perhaps the leadership of a boss or somebody that you know in the workplace. And now we're looking a little bit more closely at Jesus and the example that he gives in leadership. So I want you to start pondering what you see around you. A lot of you have acknowledged that whatever kind of leadership is at the helm in your organization trickles down, right? Whether they're transparent or not, for example, or whatever the characteristic might be, it trickles down, and it can trickle down in a positive way or a negative way. It can keep the people content and happy and feeling heard and seen, or frustrated and turning over very quickly because they're not content. I assume that you're aware that that can trickle down from the highest levels of our country, actually. So, what are the 2 things that most people don't want to talk about in a social situation? Religion and politics. What's the title of this course? Jesus, religion, and leadership, which really does step into politics, whether you want it to or not. So, we're jumping fully in. And I want you to have a comfort about this. I want you to have an ability to step outside of the A versus B argument. I had somebody in church try and push me into that. It was just a whispered conversation where they said, do you prefer dut or dut? I don't even remember what it was. And I just said, yeah, neither. I would take a blend. So I want you to learn to be able to do that, to have the intelligence to step outside of being trapped into an A or B and consider the nuances of an issue, of a conversation, and how someone is approaching leadership. So if it is for you, like me, a little bit painful to watch some of the news, and it doesn't matter where your politics fall, we can all disagree on that until the end of time. It doesn't really matter, but what I want you looking at is how leadership is being handled. So when I say the highest levels, yes, the president, but I'm also looking obviously at the Supreme Court, but not just there. The attorneys who are involved, the senators who are involved, and that's just one issue that's happening right now. If that one makes you uncomfortable or doesn't interest you, pick another. Pick something that's going on in the world today. And I want you applying some of the concepts that we've been considering, whether it's from our readings, from the TED Talks. Think about the 5 chairs that we were looking at last week. Most of you, because I asked you to, talked about yourselves and what chair you typically gravitate towards. Where would you like to see yourself? What changes might you need to make? I'm right in there with you. I would love to be in that 5th chair at all times. Not always my first place that I go, especially if I'm a little bit tired, a little bit hungry. So now I want you to take it off of yourself and start thinking about the things that you're encountering. At any level, frankly, leadership doesn't just have to be the upper echelons, right? Leadership can be the young woman or the young man at the Starbucks drive-thru who's giving you their coffee and they're emanating a particular mood. They are exhibiting leadership simply by doing their job well. So what's being imparted there? What kind of leadership is coming through? How does it impact your day? How does it impact the people around you? I want you thinking ultimately in terms of our culture, what place we're at now, what place you would rather see us at, and what changes you might be able to affect. You can have a voice in this. It can simply be in the way that we have these conversations by refusing to be locked into the A versus B, by bringing new vocabulary into the conversations, and by bringing an example that you see in the Gospels. So again, we've been looking at ourselves, and I still want you looking at yourself always. You're looking intimately about your own profession or workplace or future workplace or past workplaces. And now I want to push you a little bit to encounter the world around you, whether it's just within your city, within your life, but also national news and international news. What are you seeing? If something makes you uncomfortable, why? Is it a leadership issue? How would Jesus be responding in that situation? Think these things through, and let's keep talking. Have a great week.